Allora, buongiorno a tutti, volevo ringraziare tutti i partecipanti a questa inaugurazione della Chair Jean Monnet in European Migration Studies. Do subito la parola al magnifico rettore per i saluti e l'introduzione e poi seguiremo il programma che voi tutti avete ricevuto. Do la parola al rettore. Stefano Geona.
A tutte e a tutti, anche se un benvenuto come ormai usuale in questi difficili periodi, un benvenuto virtuale. È un grande piacere per me portare il saluto a questa iniziativa, un'iniziativa che appunto è importante perché rientra come a pieno titolo nelle attività istituzionali di un ateneo grande, importante come il nostro, quindi la formazione da un lato, ma anche la divulgazione scientifica, partecipare attivamente al dibattito scientifico per il progresso delle scienze. Lasciatemi dire che è particolarmente interessante essere presente e portare questo saluto anche per i temi, il tema che è principale, che viene affrontato in questo momento di approfondimento e di studio, il tema appunto della migrazione, delle migrazioni. Il nostro Ateneo, come tutti gli Atenei, ma io in particolare come coloro che seguono le attività da quando sono in carica appunto molto, è giusto che sia, e come fanno la gran parte, se non tutti, i colleghi rettori delle altre università italiane in giro per il mondo, sull'internazionalizzazione, sull'essere l'accademia in qualcosa che per sua stessa natura va oltre i confini di una nazione, di un continente, di uno spazio geografico limitato. Questo è sempre stato l'Accademia, è sempre stato un crocevia in cui si incrociano appunto culture, attitudini, punti di vista differenti. Quindi il tema dell'incontro di oggi si iscrive perfettamente in questa politica di grande apertura, di grande internazionalizzazione, intesa proprio nell'ottica di rendere il mondo dell'accademia un qualcosa che vada ben oltre i confini e anzi sia addirittura il motore per abbattere quelle barriere, quei confini, non solo fisici ma spesso anche culturali, politici, normativi, che in molti casi oggi sono ancora barriere più complesse, più difficili da superare rispetto ai muri, ai fossati del passato. Quindi un saluto a tutte e a tutti, buon lavoro e complimenti agli organizzatori per aver organizzato questo interessante evento, e ovviamente un benvenuto speciale al nostro keynote speaker, che appunto se riuscirò cercherò almeno in parte di seguirne la relazione. Buona giornata e buon lavoro.
Grazie infinite Rettore, dei suoi incoraggiamenti e del suo sostegno. I have the pleasure to give the floor instead to Patrick Doyle. Patrick Doyle is part of the European Commission, especially to the Italian delegation. He is an expert on migration. Please, Patrick, to you is the floor.
Buongiorno a tutti, good morning. And first of all, thank you very much to the University of Turin and Professor Venturini for the invitation to this event, and in general, of course, to the organization, also the study cycle on European migration studies. In the last years, migration has been extremely controversial topic in European politics and societies, and it continues to be also like that today. At the same time, migration is also a part of European societies and has always been part of them. and contributes also in many ways to the richness of and to the well-being of European societies. This reality is, let's say, clearly reflected also in the new Pact on Migration and Asylum, which was presented last September by the European Commission to the EU member states and the European Parliament, with the aim to promote a comprehensive approach to migration and to strengthen also the coordination between EU member states and with our partner countries, including those on the other side of the Mediterranean, to better manage migration and, let's say, to counter a bit the prejudice which is sometimes promoted also by politicians or media in Europe against the phenomenon of migration. While we will have cost to continue in our negotiations with member states and the parliament to find often very difficult compromises on some of the most sensitive issues, such as on how to ensure, let's say, a good balance between responsibility and solidarity between the various member states. We hope that we will manage to achieve results within, let's say, the next year. The European Pact has also clearly underlined, for instance, the importance of making further progress in the area of integration of migrants in Europe. Migrants already represent a significant part of citizens in Europe and contribute through their labor to develop, let's say, our societies. And the Commission intends, let's say, to further promote also their integration. And in this regard, it is of course also fundamental to promote, let's say, the scientific study of the migration phenomenon in our societies, in order to counter also the slogans and sometimes wrong ideas that can be promoted on the migration phenomenon. It is, of course, of fundamental importance to promote also the kind of evidence-based policy on this issue. And in this framework, of course, the role which is played by universities, by academia, to analyze in detail all the different facets, all the different aspects of European migration policies cannot be underlined more. And of course, also the contributions that the academic world, the scientific world can make in disseminating then the information about the migration phenomenon, which is of course also of extreme usefulness for the European institutions, for the governments of the member states, in order to make better informed decisions and to have also a long-term perspective with regards to migration management. In this context, of course, this new study cycle on European migration politics is extremely welcome. The European Commission is very happy that it will take place, and is happy to continue to contribute also to the success of this new study cycle, and is looking forward to the discussions and to the presentations we will also have today. Thank you very much, and all the best for the further event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Patrick. We are really caring about we are really looking forward to what the Commission is doing. I just give the floor now, and I ask all the other colleagues to close the microphone, please, to Anna Caffarena, who is the president of the course of International Relations, who is the one that has opened this course, has supported these activities. Anna, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Alessandra. I remember very well when a few months ago you shared with all of us the very good news that you had been awarded this well-deserved Jean Monnet Chair, and it's really a great pleasure to be here today for the inauguration of the chair, which, as mentioned, opens a new cycle in research, teaching, reflection for all of us on the issue of migration. It's a pleasure to be here with you, with Professor Farg, who is honoring us with his presence and his scholarship, with colleagues and with students. I really believe that creating an interdisciplinary hub on migration, and this has been your idea since a long time, since you started this work with the module, the Jean Monnet module, creating an interdisciplinary hub to do research on migration is really an excellent and forward-looking idea for many reasons that I will not repeat, as Mr. Patrick Doel just mentioned them. But since I'm here in my capacity as academic coordinator of the Master in International Science, let me say that your leadership, Alessandra, has already generated many opportunities for the students, and I just one I want to mention in particular, because I think it's particularly really relevant, is that over the last few years, over 100 students earned their diploma in migration studies. So thank you, Alessandra, for all the work you have done and for the activities that will be offered within the chair, immigration studies that have been planned, that will take place in the coming months, in the next academic years. These activities are really a source of enrichment for training programs, but I must say for all of us, even for the colleagues that are not specifically working on migration, but that recognize the relevance of this topic for our contemporary society, as the rector said, opening this day. Thank you.
Anna, thank you very much. You see, I had the ideas, but without Anna Caffarena, nothing would have been right at the end. So the support she always provides to all of us is fantastic, because realizing project is more important than having only the ideas, especially in Italy, when the administration, the machine is very complex. Okay, I will take only 2 minutes to describe what is the plan of the chair, Jean Monnet, in this formal opening of this chair. The chair is meant to be and will be, as Anna said already, a hub for interdisciplinary knowledge of migration. That means the migration choice, the effect of migration in the destination country, in the sending countries, and the policies which favor and support migrant inclusion. The program is then meant for students, researchers, practitioners, and also institutions as local, national, and international level. The chair organizes few courses, offers several courses. One of these is the Economics of Migration in Europe, which is one of the 3 courses of the interdisciplinary diploma in migration studies offered here at Turin University, which is organized together with political scientists and with lawyers. And here with us we have 2 colleagues, Francesco Costamagna and Manuela Concito, who are part of the diploma. The chair also offers innovative satellite seminar, which are organized with foreign speakers online. And these satellite seminars one is the consumption of cultural goods as driver of migrant integration, which is a very new subject. Very little research is done on this field, and so we are very proud to offer it. The second one is drivers of European family reunification, which is the main channel of entrance of foreigner, but which is also a domain which has been definitely under-investigated so far. And the third one is migration in the neighborhood of Europe. As you can see from our poster, today's main lecture is an introduction to this field of research. I don't want to use more time. You can find all this information on the web of the chair, which is at your disposal easily. Let me now introduce the speaker of today. It is a great honor for me to introduce Philippe Fargue, who is the best-known scholar on migration in the Mediterranean. He is a demographer and a sociologist, and he is so special because he has a deep and direct knowledge of all the countries involved in migration process, which are many. He has been professor in so many universities, he visits so many countries, but just to mention the more recent one, he was at the Lebanon American University, at the American University of Cairo, in several universities in the Gulf states, and of course Harvard, Paris School of International Affairs, at Sciences Po. At the European University Institute, he has organized the first observatory on migration in the Mediterranean, which was by far the first and the best. And on that occasion, Roberta Luffi, who is our colleague here at the University of Torino, was rapporteur during a conference. He also built the Migration Policy Center, which organized the final observatory of migration, which operates as a consultancy unit for the European Commission. And it was another instrument of paramount importance. He is now working as a consultant for various international institutions, including the World Bank, the IOM, the UN. And we are very happy that he has found the time to be with us at the opening of the Jean Monnet Chair on European Migration Study, to lecture on integrating migrants for integrating regions, shared challenges around the Mediterranean. Philippe, the floor is yours.
Hello, good morning everybody. And thank you, Alessandra, for your very nice words about me. Let me congratulate you on the creation of this very timely chair on European migration studies. So my presentation or my talk will be on challenges, on migration challenges around the Mediterranean. And when we talk about the Mediterranean, we are used to emphasize contrasts between southern countries and northern countries in the Mediterranean. And this applies in particular to migration. But I would try to have the opposite discourse about this. If we move away from the common focus on geographic entities that are recognized, for example, by the United Nations, like Northern Africa, Western Asia, Southern Europe, etc. And if we consider just 2 regions that are meaningful for their inhabitants, the 2 regions are the Arab world and the European Union, then we have a very different picture. And you will find out in what I'm going to present that migration patterns in these two regions are pretty much comparable, and that challenges for migration to work for social cohesion and progress are shared by these two regions. So the two regions are the Arab world, all the countries, let us say, from the Atlantic, Morocco, to the Gulf states, and the European Union. And I will present data on the EU 28 more than EU 27, because I'm looking at recent trends, and until recently, EU was comprising 28 states, not 27. So the Arab world, like the European Union, are regions that are defined and endorsed from within. They have institutions. In the Arab world, you have the League of Arab States, which started in 1945 with 6 founding states and gradually enlarged to 22 member states today. The Charter of the League of the Arab States provides for the free mobility of people between countries, even though national legislations do not provide for that free mobility. The Arab world, unlike the European Union, has, let us say, to be short, one culture, one shared language, which facilitates the mobility of people and their integration into societies. But there is extreme economic diversity in the Arab world, from Yemen and Mauritania, that are among the poorest countries in the world, to Qatar or the United Arab Emirates, that are the richest in the world. So this drives emigration and immigration. So can you please now do the slideshow for me, Alessandra? Yes, and show next one, please. Next one, please.
Yes, sure.
There is one table somewhere. I'm sorry about it, but yes, okay, thank you. Let us stop on this. So you will see on that PowerPoint that there are striking similarities between the two regions, apart from the fact that they are almost the same size. Well, Arab states are less populated than the European Union, but not that less. Both regions are regions of intense migration. First, intense migration, if you compare to a world average of 3.4%, you have the percentage here, and you will see that whether you consider the Arab states or Europe, you have extremely intense migration. In both regions, inward migration, immigration, is more important than outward migration, than emigration. The second remark I want to make is that in both regions, intra-regional migration is very significant. If we consider the Arab world, migration is the #1 form of exchange between the countries of the region. If we take Europe, free mobility and freedom of establishment, the Schengen Treaty is a key treaty and a cornerstone of the European Union, and I would say, very sadly, of its disunion as well. The third remark I want to make is, again, have a look at this, is that trans-Mediterranean migration is relatively small. It is relatively small and asymmetric. At present, it is almost exclusively from south to north. That migration, and that was reminded by Alessandra, is first and foremost family reunification. I would like to add student migration, and if we consider the year 2005-2016, forced migration, refugee movements. Labor migration is not that big in cross-Mediterranean migration. The fourth remark I want to make, and please, Alessandra, can we, yes, is this one, that one of the striking facts, if we look at the Mediterranean region, is that the Mediterranean Sea is the most lethal border in the world. Between 2000 and 2020, 40,000 people died trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea. And in terms of probability, it is enormous. The probability of dying during the crossing is 2 per 1,000 crossings. So it's enormous. Let us now review trends, migration trends in the Arab region. And sorry, I don't have a map here to show, but I will very briefly talk about 3 parts of the Arab world. First, the central part, which is the Mashreq states, from Egypt to Iraq, if you want. Second, the western part, which is the Maghreb. And third, the Gulf states or the Arabian Peninsula states. So just a few words about each of these 3 regions. The Mashreq states first, which are Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, and Iraq, and Yemen also. What is striking, if we look at the last, let us say, half of a century or the last century, and migration in that period, is that armed conflicts have been critical triggers of migration. Since World War II, many conflicts have affected that part of the world. First, wars between Israel and Palestine, between Israel and the Arab states, between Iraq and Iran, between Iraq and Kuwait, between the United States and allies and Iraq, and also civil conflicts in Lebanon, in Sudan, in Syria, in Iraq again, in Yemen, etc. All these wars, all these armed conflicts had first a direct impact because they displaced people. But more importantly, perhaps, they also had an indirect impact on the governance, on the political systems in these countries. It worked toward the perpetuation of authoritarian regimes and often military regimes, with many adverse consequences on freedom and development, explaining emigration from these countries. And actually, next PowerPoint, please. If we look at migration trends in this part of the Arab region, we see that emigration, 22.6 million people, is more important than immigration, 8.8 million people. Much of that emigration from these countries is intra-Arab migration, and including intra-Mashreq migration. If you look well at the table, you will see that you have 2 net receivers of migrants, Lebanon and Jordan. And just a few words about one of these countries, Lebanon. Lebanon is a case in point. Its emigration is extremely significant. 15% of its population is comprised of first-generation migrants. And if we include second and third, etc., generation migrants, then we have many more of them. And the paradox is, and that's interesting for migration studies, is that this country is at the same time a country of immigration. Young people leave the country because they don't find a job in the country, but also a magnet for low-skilled immigrants. Why is it so? Because it is rich in relative terms compared with other countries of the region. And the wealth of Lebanon, which is no longer true after the events of last year, but the wealth of Lebanon is partly brought by its own emigration. So emigration from Lebanon explains immigration into Lebanon. Egypt is another case in point I want to highlight. First, because of its demography. It's a big country. It is the biggest Mediterranean country with over 100 million inhabitants today. And also, it's a country where climate migration could become something important. Please, Alexandra, next slide. This is the northern part of Egypt. And for people who know a bit the geography of the country, water is a double threat for Egypt. Fresh water is a problem because that country of 100 million inhabitants lives on only one source of water, which is the Nile River, which is shared peacefully until now with two big countries, Ethiopia and Sudan. But seawater may also be a problem in the future. Look at what will happen if the water elevates by 2 meters. All let us say, the northern part of Egypt will be under sea level. And that part, which is fated to become under sea level, is populated by tens of millions of inhabitants today. So that is a country which may be the most acute examples of climate problems in the Mediterranean region. A last word about the Mashreq countries. If we look at these countries in the recent period, refugee movements are extremely important. Next slide, please. If we look at the Arab countries of the Mashreq alone, they are producers of 38% of the world's refugees. They are receivers of 70% of the world refugees. And they are home to 31% of the world's internally displaced people. All that for only 3% of the world population. So it means that refugee issues are an overwhelming, we say, issue in the region. The second fact I want to show is that I want to just to highlight is that the recent conflict in Syria, the last 10 years, have been a great challenge for the international refugee regime, international refugee law. Why is it so? Because the countries of first asylum of Syrian refugees are not party to the Geneva Convention on Refugees. They do not have a proper refugee status in the sense of international refugee law. Of course, they have generously hosted and sometimes protected migrants, but yet it is a charity-based, not a rights-based approach to the problem of refugees. The third fact I want to highlight here is that there has been recently a shift in the international approach to refugee protection, from humanitarian aid to aid to development. The new slogan, and that slogan is very much one of the European Union also, is tackling economic opportunities of refugee movements. The way forward for international donors would be to try to take the most of economic opportunities brought by migrants. And the European Union, for example, had initiatives in order to attract refugees into the local labor market of their countries of first asylum, namely Jordan and Lebanon. These initiatives were compacts signed with these two countries, and just to cut a long story short, these compacts would provide Lebanon and Jordan with aid and trade incentives in exchange of employment for refugees. And also what is at stake is providing refugees in these countries with work permits for admitting them on the local labor market. I have big problems with this approach. I have big problem with this approach because first, of course, first with the goal. The goal is keeping refugees close to their origin. And we have to understand this as keeping them away from Europe. But the second problem I have is that this is absolutely not adapted to the nature of labor markets in countries like Lebanon and Jordan and other countries of the South. Why so? Because most employment is informal, and a work permit is not a problem. The only problem is a residence permit. And what the European Union should have done is working with these countries in order to provide refugees in these countries with permits of residence. So there is here the nagging question of solidarity. Where is Europe in this story? Protecting people is a founding principle of Europe, and there is no doubt, absolutely no doubt, that Europe protects asylum seekers once they are in the European Union. But Europe, and I don't have time here to develop this, makes also many obstacles on the road from countries of first asylum in the Middle East to the European Union. And we have seen that if you don't have a visa when you are a Syrian, a tourist or a worker or a student or family reunion visa, you don't have any other choice than traveling with no visa and to use the services of smugglers. So let me now say just a few words, but I think it's important to say a few words of another region, sub-region in the Arab world. Please, next slide, which is, next slide again, next, sorry, yes, the Gulf states. You can go next again, Alessandra. Thank you so much. So just a few words about that region. This region, which is inside the Arab world, is the third largest destination for global migrants. You have more than 30 million migrants, international migrants in the Gulf states, and migrants represent from half of the resident population to more than 80% of the resident population according to countries. Migrants have been absolutely instrumental in transforming oil wealth into welfare for nationals. The problem is that all these people are theoretically temporary migrants. They are contract workers. They are not accepted as part of the citizenries in the Gulf states. And policies of these large receivers.
L'elettricità è andata via.
What?
No, just a second. Now everything is on.
What was the problem?
Philippe, go on. Philippe, go on.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to say a word about this. The Gulf states have been for the last 2 or 3 decades probably the only place in the world where low-skilled migrants were not only welcome, but they were looked for. So, but these states, as I just said, have developed policies along 2 lines. First, not integrating the migrants, and second, replacing as much as possible migrants with nationals. This did not work so far, but we don't know what will happen in the near future. But of course, we have to look carefully at this because the Gulf states are the main destination, for example, for Egyptian migrants. Millions of them are living in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. But what will happen when Kuwait and Saudi Arabia will no longer be destinations for the Egyptian migrants? Okay. The third region I want to talk about now, please, next slide, Alessandra, is the Maghreb state, which is what we consider to be Northern Africa, viewed from Europe. Here, I would like to highlight 4 facts. The first fact is that the Maghreb, until today, is a major region of emigration. 6% of its population lives abroad. Second, I want to highlight the fact that contrary to the states of the Mashreq, the state of the Maghreb have migration that goes overwhelmingly to Europe. Europe is the destination of 70% of Maghrebi migrants. The third fact, which is important, is that transit migration from sub-Saharan Africa to Northern Africa is growing. It is extremely limited in numbers if we accept Libya. but it had already a strong impact on the governance of migration. Law criminalizing irregular migration have been passed in all the countries of the central Maghreb, Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria. And this is something which, of course, is considered to be extremely important by the European Union. The fourth fact I want to highlight is that there is chaos, political chaos in one key country in the Maghreb, which is Libya. Before 2011, before the Arab uprisings and before the removal of the Libyan dictator, Libya was an oil state, and immigration to Libya was extremely important, like to the Gulf states. People, migrant workers would come from neighboring countries, Egypt and Tunisia, but also from sub-Saharan Africa and the rest of the world. Most of them were workers, and they would return to their origin countries after a while. Several tens of thousands yet were transit migrants. They were waiting for a passage to Europe. They had no visa, and at that time, the dictator of Libya was regarded a responsible partner by the European Union for policing migration, for controlling the external border of Europe by controlling the Libyan shore. Border control is still very much a timely issue here, and as we know, there is a cooperation between Italy and Libya on this issue. Okay. I would say that the European Union's philosophy about Libya is not very clear to me. It is obviously to migration by shutting the maritime routes. It is also closing the eyes on what's happening today in Libya, though you have a number of concerns of policymakers in Europe expressing concerns about the atrocities of which migrants are victims in these countries. Now, let me cross the Mediterranean, because time is flying, and say a few words about Europe and about aging, demographic aging, and its paradox. If we look at Europe today, thank you for the slide, Alexandra. If we look at Europe, anti-immigration policies have been rising, not everywhere, but in many parts of Europe. And I think that these policies are one of the most serious threats facing Europe. They are not good, first, for Europe's internal cohesion. Of course, these policies are meant to address public opinion's concern about migration. But actually, I think that if we look at these policies, we will see that they go in parallel with anti-immigration, with Euroscepticism, and with calling Schengen into question. Just remember the Brexit. Second, I think that these policies are not good for Europe's security. As I tried to show very briefly, the Mediterranean is a region of high insecurity. Large-scale forced migration from a number of countries, I mentioned Syria and Iraq, is a heavy burden for our neighbors in the Arab region and for Turkey. And this has unforeseeable political outcomes in these countries. It is a factor of insecurity in southern Mediterranean. And insecurity in southern Mediterranean is a threat for the European Union. The third reasons for which it is not good, and I will now talk about this, is Europe's future. Precisely now, starting from the 2010s, Europe is entering a period of durable population shrinking and aging. Demographic predicament is a challenge in Europe. It challenges the weight of Europe in the world, and it challenges the wealth and welfare of Europe. Just consider, yes, this slide. The previous one. The previous one. Thank you so much. So if migration stops today, and this is what you will find in the no migration scenario of Eurostat population projections, European nations are going to be dwarfed. The largest state, Germany, will rank 25th. I don't have a slide for this, but no problem. So Europe may well lose economic strength in the world and political strength. You know, what will be the weight of Europe in the world if its first countries is 25th by the size of its population? The economic strength of Europe is the second big problem. If migration stops today, then Europe will lose, listen to the number, 60 million workers in the next 30 years, which is minus 23% of its current workforce. And not only it will lose workers, but it will gain 37 million old age pensioners. So this has two consequences. One is and we know that, the unsustainability, of the current welfare systems. And the second one is aging of skills in Europe. The missing workers will mainly be young workers. If we look at the age group 20 to 45, then the loss will be 33 million people in the next 30 years. So 33 million people, young people, who are the people with the most up-to-date skills. Now, let us open very, very briefly a discussion about aging. Aging, is it good or is it bad for economies? If I listen to my friends economists, aging can be good for the labor market. It can be good because there is an age dividend. The experience of the worker increases with age. So human capital is increasing with aging labor force. And not only this, but you have differentials in age at retirement. The less skilled retire earlier, meaning that with aging, the proportion of high-skilled workers increases. Okay, that is the good news. But there are other news not that good. If we look at labor productivity, then what we know is that formal education increases from one generation to the next, that young people are more educated than old people, and not only they are more educated, but as I said, they have a more up-to-date education in terms of skills. So the reduction of the proportion of young people is skills aging, meaning that the stock of creative knowledge decreases with time. And this is not at all good news. There are several possible responses to this. First, lifelong learning. For example, Germany is very good at this, but it has limits. I will not discuss the limits. Second, there is a big question mark. Second possible response is automation of labor, is artificial intelligence, etc. Yes, we don't know what can be its role in replacing workers by algorithms, etc. What we know is that it also creates jobs, so needs workers and high-skilled workers, and skills aging is not good for developing the algorithms. And the third solution is replacement migration. Next slide, please. Next slide again. Yes, the good news is here that if we look at migration and the distribution by age of migrant, it's the blue line on the graph you have. Migrants are young, they're young people. On average, a migrant is aged 25 years at the time of migration. 25 years, it is just after completing formal education, but it is before the age of maximum productivity, labor productivity, the green line that you have on that graph. So it means that migration can bring not all the solution, but part of the solution to demographic shrinking and aging in Europe. Now, and I will try to conclude on this, from where could or should migrants into the European Union come in the future? Will they come from Mediterranean countries, or will they come from other countries selected not on geographical proximity, but on other factors, because today migration is global? That is a big question. I don't have the answer to that question. What I want to say, to highlight here, that there is a problem with migration, and that problem is the issue of integration deficits. We need to overcome that issue if we want migration to work not only for economies, not only for a number of economic sectors, and not all of them, but also to work for societies and culture. And if we have a quick look at both shores of the Mediterranean, both regions, the Arab world on the one side and Europe on the other side, are affected by deficits in migrant integration. You can just remove the slides show now, I think. No, I won't have time to develop all this. No, I won't have time. So I will try. Okay, I will just conclude. Yeah, the conclusion slide, the previous one, is enough. The conclude. Thank you very much, Alessandra. So in both, in the south, there is a deficit of integration because migrants are not integrated in the framework of rights. To cut a long story short, when you are a migrant in an Arab country, you have no prospect whatsoever to become a citizen with the nationality of your country or the country where you reside. And of course, because you don't become a citizen, immigration is creating a large number of non-citizens, meaning of people who are denied a number of rights, even though due to the language, due to social integration factors, they can be extremely well integrated socially. But in terms of rights, no. And I don't have time to discuss this, but of course, this is becoming an extremely big problem because you have increasing numbers of people just living in limbo in this part of the world. In the north now, in Europe, there is also a deficit of integration. It is not a deficit of integration in the rights framework because we can integrate after a long stay, varying according to country, we can integrate migrants into the framework of rights, fully integrate them as citizens. But there is an important deficit of social and economic integration. Let us just take the most recent employment survey of the European Union. If I look at the numbers, the employment rate at 2064 is 73% for natives. It is only 63% for people born outside the European Union. If we look at early school leavers, it is 9.6% for natives. It is 19.3% for non-EU born migrants. If we look at risk of poverty rate, it is 15% for natives. It is 30.8% for non-EU born residents. If we look at severe material deprivation, it is 7% for natives, and it is 12% for non-EU born migrants, etc., etc. So there is here a deficit. There is here a deficit, and clearly we have to call into question our policies in many regards. For example, let me just take an example. The very good, apparently very good policy of social housing, which had consisted in the 1970s, 1980s, etc., to create social housing in particular districts of cities, had resulted into creating ghettos into creating dysfunctional schools because you had a majority of migrants in schools and social destitutions. So we have really, I think, to think about better integrating the migrants. And let me just have a last word about this. There was a recent initiative at international level, which was the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, which was adopted by a majority of the world states in 2018, just a bit more than 2 years ago. It contains a number of principles and objectives, including which integration is important. But I'm very sad to say that many European states just did not participate into that global compact on migration. So they did not participate mainly because public opinions would have said, okay, we are recognizing rights to migrants. This could be a first step, for recognizing right to migration. No, don't make confusion. It's not the same. We have to increase the recognition of social, economic, etc. rights for migrants into our respective contexts, south of the Mediterranean and north of the Mediterranean. Otherwise, migration will become a very serious problem for the societies. Okay, this is what I wanted to say. Thank you for listening to me. That was very long, sorry about it.
No. Thank you very much, Philippe. It is a pity that we are very far and we cannot clap directly to your speech, which is so rich, so challenging. We have a series of colleagues that are happy to give some comment on what you have done, and I pass immediately the floor to them. You want to collect the question, imagine, answer to them at the end. So let me start with Marco Sanfilippo.
Oh, okay.
Marco Sanfilippo was a former colleague at the European University Institute. He was also one of the writers of the development report of the European that the EUI did for the European Commission. So he's very well rooted to make comment by economists, not by demographer, philosopher, political scientist. Marco, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Philippe. Can you hear me, right? Okay.
I can. Yes, Marco, I can see you as well.
Yeah, good to see you. Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Very nice, very insightful. I'm not really an expert on the area, but I heard with a lot of interest. Many thanks. I have two questions. One is my economist angle, no? So it's about some sort of methodology and data. I was just wondering whether the data that you have presented about inward and outward migration, how was this defined? So it includes regular migrants or illegal migrants. So should we expect, the bottom question is, should we expect that there is a bias in this measurement, and in which direction the bias could probably go? And this is the data-related question. The question which is most on the policy side, I mean, there is a debate among economists, for instance, and some research which is still unclear, which is about the effectiveness of aid, no? In refraining, basically, migration. So this is also baked by the help them at their home by some policymakers, no? So we provide aid and then we improve local economic conditions, and this way we regulate migration from some of these countries. You have just quickly touched upon this issue when referring to these aid programs for refugees in Lebanon and another country. I just would really like to have your view about the effectiveness, the vision of this type of interventions more generally. So do you have a view on this, and what's your view? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Do you prefer to answer immediately?
No, yes, no, yeah.
You collect. I give the floor to Manuela Sconsito, who is professor of migration law and coordinator of the Legal Clinic on Human Rights here at the University of Torino.
Thank you very, very much, Alessandra.
I can see you.
Can you see me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, thanks. Thanks to Alessandra, because she's a volcano of ideas, and thank you to Philippe also. I just want to start from your conclusion, because you were pointing a very important aspect, that is integration. So I just want to ask you, what's your opinion about the last action plan promoted by the European Commission about integration and inclusion of migrants, especially of those who have right to reside in Europe? Because this action plan that came out in November underlined how many of migrants that are coming in Europe are overqualified, and it stated that almost 40% are overqualified for the job they do. And if we think to a gender approach, we can also notice that this is a percentage that goes up if the people are especially women. So many women are now involved in jobs that are underqualified for their qualification. And I don't know. I read this action plan, and to me, it's more like a statement of fact than a program. So I would like to know if you figure any good policies that could be somehow enhanced by Europe in order to really promote integration, for instance, by promoting cooperation among states about the recognition of qualification, about the idea of measures that could promote a pre-departure integration, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Manuela. I now pass the floor to Roberta Luffi, who is professor of legal studies in the Arab world. Roberta.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Because I have problems with limited bandwidth.
Sorry, Roberta, I cannot hear you well.
But I'm so sorry. What shall I do? I try to first increase the volume.
We listen very well now, Roberta. I close my microphone and go ahead.
Okay.
Yes, I started.
Okay.
For the brief speech and for inviting me. I really congratulate you for this event and the chair. Well, just a question, very short question. Unlike in the past, migration does not entail the severance of migrant bonds. I'm sorry, the severance of migrants from home country. And this strong transnational dimension is based on the one part on the internet, and on the other part on low-cost flights. Well, first of all, I don't know whether this transnational dimension helps integration. I assume that it does help integration. But anyway, the pandemic has changed all this. It has strengthened the internet, the virtual bonds, while it has weakened the physical one. In your opinion, when the pandemic is over, will everything go back the way it was? Or not? Thank you. I hope you could.
We are very sorry that the line was not very clear, but fundamentally, I think, Philippe,
I could understand the question.
Yes, understand. I give the floor to Francesco Costamagna, who is Professor European Mobility and Migration Flow. Francesco, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much to Alessandra. Once again, many congratulations for this big achievement. And thank you very much to Philippe, because your speech was really, really challenging, as Alessandra was saying. I have just a short question about one remark you made when you discussed about the Global Compact. And one of the main concerns of many states, Italy included, was, hey, we are kind of recognizing a sort of a right to migrate, and we don't want that. So I would like, I'm sorry, I'm a lawyer, so I have been sort of attracted by this remark. Why do you see this step that is coming close to recognizing a sort of a right to migrate? Do you feel that is so problematic from the perspective of the state? I can understand that from an internal political debate. When the Global Compact was discussed, we had Lega Nord, and yes, we have Lega Nord again in power, but okay. But from a broader perspective, would you see this step as a positive one? Would this add something to the debate? And can this help in some way to reframe the problem? In my view, we're still approaching the problem from a very old perspective, such as, for instance, the distinction between economic migrant and refugee, which is something which makes little sense if we look at your data. We need economic migrants, apparently, and to make our welfare system more sustainable, to find new labor force and all these sort of things. And we're still there. If we look at the very recent initiative, which has been taken by the Commission, we're still there. We're still talking about this distinction. We are still saying, okay, for refugee, but no economic migrant at all, or very little quotas and all these things. So my question goes back to that issue of the right to migrate in that specific context. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francesco. I have a last planned question by the ambassador, the former Italian ambassador Enrico Granara, who is responsible for the Mediterranean. I don't know if the technician are able to give him the flow. Why I have the question on the chat. I don't think they were able. So I will read the question. The question is. Earlier in February, the European Commission announced in its agenda for the Mediterranean, that is to say the southern neighborhood countries, migration mobility stand in the 4th place among the 5 policy areas. Do you have any information regarding the plan or financing vocational training in the Maghreb area? This was in line with the Luxembourg President plan in 2015 that was put aside, leaving in a vacuum, only apparently filled by modest bilateral initiative. This is the question of Enrico Granara, who is the former Italian ambassador for the Mediterranean. That means that also practical issues should be done. And I have my own question. Philippe, I would like to exploit your expertise to have a little information on what role is playing China in this future migration plan. And with this very open question, I give you the floor to answer.
Okay. So many questions. Thank you very much. They are all extremely good questions. I will take chronologically, let's say. So first, the 2 questions of Marco. First question on data. Well, I did not present many data in these slides. I mainly relied on the United Nations database on migration, which presents flows by origin and destination in 2019, meaning a year and a half ago. Of course, you are certainly aware of the fact that collecting data on migration is long. And when the UN produces a database on what happened less than 2 years ago, in that database, you have models, many models replacing missing data, and missing data are probably a majority of it. So the first point here is that these are estimates. These are not the real data. Second, theoretically, estimates integrate irregular migrants, but we don't know. What we know is that when we have data on irregular migrants, which is data from particular surveys or particular files, they show quite a difference between migrants in irregular situation and migrants with the regular status. So your question is good, but I do not have the right answer to this. Second question is on development and migration. And this old idea that was, I remember it was an old idea, including in the Barcelona process at the end of the 1990s. The idea was, let us provide aid to development, and that aid to development will remove the root causes of emigration, among which poverty, etc., are important causes. Then we had a number of good studies showing that things are not that simple, and that actually, if you increase the level of development, you will increase the proportion in the population of people that can afford the cost of migration, and then you will increase migration. Well, this is an interesting debate, but I think it's a bit outdated in terms of debate. What is emerging now is also a mistake, and I try to explain why it is a mistake, which is this idea that to avoid migration, you have to provide employment in the place where they are. Okay, but let's look at the context of many countries, like the countries of the Middle East, where you have immigrants, and these immigrants are refugees, and they are reaching countries that have themselves employment problems with their own nationals, including they are plagued with unemployment. So if you promote the employment of refugees in these countries, you may well end up with having a policy which is not at all popular with the natives, with the locals of these countries. And this is what's happening with European compacts on migration in Lebanon and Jordan, which start from the wrong idea that the problem is with employment permit, while the problem is with the structure of the labor market in these countries. Second, so now let me go to the question of Manuel. Basically, you touched upon a very big issue, which is the overqualification of migrants. It's I think a big problem, which has been measured in many cases when you compare the education of a migrant with the occupation of that person in the country of destination. You will conclude that many migrants are overqualified, which is why. It means after all that many of our economies in the most advanced economies of the world, in the post-industrial economies, many of our economies continue to need low-skilled work, low-skilled labor, or low-skilled. Well, I don't like the term low-skilled because it's just a different kind of skills. So it means this, and only migrants are probably ready to fill that gap. It also means something which is interesting, that it may leave the door open to labor mobility, meaning that a migrant arrives in an occupation, but because that person has more education than the one requested by her or his actual occupation, then that person can be mobile on the receiving labor market. So this is, in a sense, this is a kind of asset. The point you mentioned, which is the recognition of qualifications, I'm not at all an expert on this, but what I know is that in a number of countries, there is a protection of national qualifications. There is a protection of national qualifications for good or bad reasons. Qualifications acquired elsewhere are not fully recognized. Probably they are not fully recognized because there is suspicion that they are not as good as local qualification. But this attitude may well change if we try to have policies that are based on the measurement of real, not qualification as much as performance of people. Let us take the example of the PISA test or the TIMSS test that are becoming not global instruments, but yet largely used at international level. These tests or these measurement of qualification could well be used to nuance or to mitigate this rigid position, nationalist position on the superiority of national qualifications compared with international qualifications. But the problem is, of course, protecting also citizens, which is a duty for states. So it's a big equation. Labor markets are continuously evolving. They need a number of qualifications, and this is the reality of labor markets. So I don't have to be short the final answer on your question. Roberta, now it was difficult for me to follow you because the line was not good. But if I understand well, you insisted on something which is a big issue, which is that with the pandemic, with the COVID pandemic, a number of activities that was unfolding in the real world has been displaced and have shifted towards the virtual world of internet communication. And how will this affect migration? Well, it's a big question, and I have absolutely no idea about this. I have no idea about this. What is certain is that the pandemic has put obstacles to international mobility of people, including migrants, with two contradictory results. One is that new migrants could not reach their intended destination, so they are no longer migrants, I would say, for the time being, and that all migrants could not get in close contact, as in the past, with their countries of origin. We've seen that many migrants have been stuck in the country of destination, not in the country of origin, because of these closure of the borders. Certainly, all this will have an impact, but of what nature, I don't have an idea. I don't have an idea, but it can be a good topic for research to try to have a kind of systematic inventory of what are the occupations or what are the activities that have proved to be replaceable by virtual kind of things. Now, the next question by Francesco about the global compact, about the legal approach to migration, etc. First, right of migration, right to migrate. Well, it's an old issue. It's an old issue. There is half of that right today. There is half of that right. If you look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, then you know that Article 13 says that any individual has a right to leave his or her country and to return to that country. So there is a right of emigration. The problem is when you leave your country, you have to remain in the no man's land before another country accepts you, because you cannot claim any international right of immigrating into another country. And that is the main shortcoming of the human rights the human rights approach of migration, that it recognizes that on one side, people who are born in, let us put it like this, the wrong side of a border can leave the country, can cross that border, but there is no obligation for any other state to take them. So should we move towards the real free international migration of people? That would certainly be a big change. But are states and public opinions ready to this today? I'm not sure. Not sure. I think that current trends are exactly moving the opposite direction. So we are probably going to have to live with this idea that immigration is a right, but immigration is a privilege. It's a privilege falling under state sovereignty. So once the international system is no longer based on nation states claiming identity, etc., then perhaps it will change. But we are far from this, and that was one of the big limitations of the Global Compact on migration, that the discussion never went that far to include this idea of a right of migration. Still hear me, because something is happening on my, okay. The other point is important. I think, and you are absolutely right, that the distinction can no longer stand as a clear-cut distinction. Why is it so? For various reasons, but because both economic migrants and refugees are human beings. And you are a refugee, you are fleeing persecution, or you are fleeing conflict, or you are fleeing risks for your life. But at a point, you will need to earn an income. So you will need to go into the labor market. So that's the first very strong reason. Another reason is that your condition may change according to the place where you are. For example, it's interesting to look at the surveys conducted by IOM in African countries and in Europe. When you talk to, when you have a sample of migrants from Sub-Saharan Africa, and you ask these people in Northern Africa, meaning people not already reaching Europe or not willing at all to reach Europe, the vast majority of people say the reasons for which I left my country are economic reason. I'm looking for better labor condition, better welfare, etc. They will. So along the journey, the view of people can change. So it's a relative notion. The last, no, not the last, the prior to last question, but here I don't have the answer to the question of Ambassador Granara on vocational training in the Maghreb. I don't have. I'm sorry, I cannot talk about this. The last question of Alessandra is a very big open question. China, what is the role of China in this? First, China is a very significant origin country of migrant communities in the world. It is old migration, basically, that started very much in the 19th century with Chinese migration to Northern America, in the 20th century. And today, migration from China is much, much smaller. It is extremely small in proportion of the Chinese population. So China has been a big country of immigration. I'm not sure it will remain a big country of origin for migrants, but of course, because it's connected to the global world, one has to think that there will be intense mobility once, well, of course, provided that the political conditions in China allow that mobility, but mobility, back and forth mobility, will certainly increase because China is becoming not only a predominant actor in the world economy, but actor number one. So that's of course, that must be linked with the mobility of people, if not the mobility of labor. On the other side, China is not a very big country of immigration, even though if we look at certain kind of migration, it is, I think it ranks number 2 in terms of student migration, immigration of students into China. And that for, again, should increase in the future. But sure, we have to look at China, which is such a big country. You know, just to open a bracket, international migration has a paradox. The smaller the country, the bigger its international migration, because if you move, the probability that you move across a national boundary of that country is bigger than if your country is very big. And would the world be made of only one country, international migration would not exist. So China, which is such a big country with 1/5 of the world population, has an intense mobility of labor, but most of that mobility of labor does not cross the external border of China. So, okay, these were my
Philip, thank you very much for this debate. It was very interesting, the presentation, and the comment below afterward were even more interesting, also very interesting. I don't want to ask to Patrick Dole of the European Commission if you want to make a comment or a concluding comment.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. First for this very interesting presentation from Professor Fargue, and also for the various questions that have been raised and allowed to provide further information and insights on this very complex topic. Sorry, I'm trying to put on the video. Yeah, I will of course not try to hide that there are a number of possible inconsistencies at the level of EU policies on migration. These are of course due in particular to the fact that the European institutions have overall rather limited competence in this area in accordance with the treaties. So on many aspects, it's the member states who remain sovereign on these issues. If you take, for instance, legal migration, I mean, the legal migration quota are determined by the member states. So the Commission has rather limited, or the EU has rather limited powers, let's say, to influence on that. The same is true for the area of integration. The Commission can support, of course, the national integration policies, but and can support it in particular through our financial instruments, but this remains basically a national competence. And we can also see, and we have seen over the last years, the very different positions that our member states have taken on this topic, and which certainly explains the difficulty then also to find agreements on some of the most sensitive issues. and the negotiations also on some aspects of the pact continue to remain very difficult. This being said, I'm very happy about the detailed explanations, also the figures provided on the demographic evolution in Europe. This is fully acknowledged by the European Commission as one of the major challenges faced by Europe within already now, and even more within the next years and decades. And we fully agree that migration is one of the main tools, if I may say like that, or my main policies, which allows to address this challenge, and which underlines the need for integration. And in this regard, of course, the Commission also tries to promote the development of further legal pathways, be it through the resettlement of refugees or through further channels to promote legal migration. But as I just said, the power to determine who and how many migrants may come to a certain member state is a national competence, where we as a Commission can provide in particular financial support, including with regards to our partner countries, to promote, for instance, vocational training in these countries. So maybe to reply on this question, the Commission already since many years through the EU financial instruments provides also support to relevant projects in Maghreb countries on vocational training, in particular also in view of a possible immigration of citizens from these countries to Europe. So this is part of the mobility partnerships which have been signed with some of these partner countries around the Mediterranean. And this is also part of the compacts, for instance, with Lebanon and Jordan, where I think the aspect of promoting work permits, it's I would say certainly an important, but just a small part of these compacts. So I would not reduce these compacts just to this aspect, where we can then, of course, discuss if or to which extent it is relevant in the context of these countries. This being said, with regards to the promotion of legal pathways, of course, with the idea that this may then reduce the incentive for irregular migration, will certainly not put an end in the EU at international level to the important distinction made between refugees on one side and so-called economic migrants on the other side. I fear that in this regard we need to be realistic. There's a clear international UN framework which has been translated into a number of EU acts, and we can also see that in the discussions on the pact, there's certainly absolutely no intention on the side of the member states to do away with this very significant legal distinction, also because of the consideration that the status of refugees should not, or let's say the need to provide international protection to people who are fleeing persecution or conflicts should not be watered down by, let's say, enlarging it to other categories, etc. We can also see, and this is a reality as well, if you just take Italy, the case of Italy with migration back over the last years. So the highest number of arrivals in 2020 was from Tunisia, with Tunisians, whom in the very large majority don't ask for international protection when they arrive in Italy. So they do not even consider to ask for asylum, but it must be said that many of them, once as they cannot be returned, they will stay, of course, in Europe and try then to illegally cross the border to other member states. Very often they also succeed in that, and this contributes to a lot of tensions between our member states. And for this reason, well, one of the proposals from the Commission is also to strengthen the border procedures at the external borders, where the question as well is very important when it comes, for instance, to the border procedure. What is the recognition rate in terms of international protection of the various nationalities in Europe? And this is, of course, a very sensitive debate as well. Of course, we can disagree with this approach, all these considerations, but it is simply a fact, a reality, that this is one of the main questions discussed between the member states. So I fear that any hope that these legal distinctions will disappear anytime soon, may be disappointed. I would also, because of course we could continue for a long time to discuss, and I mean the questions are all very, very interesting, and the information provided. So I just would like still to just add two bits of information on two issues. So one is on Libya. Very often, let's say, the action of the European Union is presented as being limited to provide support to the Libyan Coast Guard and to prevent migrants in Libya from arriving in Europe. The European Union is, of course, very active since many years to promote, let's say, the stability in Libya, and actually now there's at least also some hope with the new government which has been formed there, that there might be, let's say, a window of opportunity to provide for more stability in that country, and then also to have a more meaningful dialogue on migration issues, and to promote certain standards in Libya, and in particular with regards to the detention centers there, where only I would like to say a very small proportion of migrants present in Libya are actually hosted or imprisoned, as you would like to say. But of course, the European Union is also extremely worried since many years about this situation, and has provided both a lot of financial support, but also promote dialogue with the Libyan authorities to put an end to these centers and to the terrible conditions in them. So just in order to balance a little bit in terms of the policies which are promoted by the European Union, which do not focus exclusively just on border protection. Last not least, with regard to China, sure, it's not so much, let's say, in the news in terms of migration. The news, in particular in Italy, focus a lot on the sea arrivals, disembarkations, whereas, let's say, the many legal pathways also to Italy are not very often reported. In Italy, if I'm not wrong, I had not the time now to check, among third country nationals, I mean, China is, I think, in the second rank after Moroccans in Italy. So the Chinese community in Italy is very, very important. I think it's the same also in other member states. So there's clearly an important migrant stock in the European Union of Chinese citizens. And also this has triggered, let's say, the decision by the European Union already a number of years ago to create also a specific dialogue on migration between the European Union and China. So there are quite regular meetings taking place between the European Union and China to discuss about all migration aspects. And this dialogue is, by the way, also supported financially by the European Commission through the partnership instrument in order then to promote, of course, also the EU policies in this regard, and also to contribute to a better understanding actually of the migratory reality of Chinese migrants in the EU and vice versa. Thank you very much for the time given to react to some of the statements and questions, and of course happy to further contribute. Thank you very much again.
Okay. Thank you very much to everybody. I am also thank Patrick Doyle, because we also know that European Commission is doing a lot, but is also playing a very important cultural role. He tried to mediate between the country perspective, which is strongly affected by the internal debate, and the bigger scenario that Philippe Farr has so clearly described. So I thank everybody. I think that the inauguration, the opening of the European Chair on European Migration Studies has been very rich of comment, of idea of success. I thank especially Philippe Farr for his fantastic keynote. The video will be online, so you can use this for your student and for other events. Thank you very much to everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye,
Ciao.
Philippe. Thank you
Ciao.
very much.
Bye-bye.